I was fortunate. I had to speak to everybody in the audience. And believe me, they didn't come in with a fixed ideas to which way they thought on a particular issue, by and large. That's all changed. Now everybody's got a fixed idea as to what their view of the world is, and there's very little that you can do to change it.
Is there something that the candidates can do today, if you were advising, that could possibly shift their vote?
It's the personal connection that matters to people. It's not when we're talking from our head, it's whether we're talking from our heart. And people are suffering the world round. And if we could cut through the academic and intellectual and actually talk the language of the heart, that's what would win an election, honestly.
What would you say, if you'd have to sum up the common denominator of someone with addiction that's in sobriety, that's actually thriving?
They're not all about themselves. The most successful people I see in recovery are always throughout the day living the prayer. Like everything they do is about helping someone else.
Hi, and welcome to Common Denominator, a podcast about growth, mindset, and entrepreneurship. I'm Moshe Popek, and today we talk politics and mental health with Patrick Kennedy. From 1995 to 2011, Patrick served as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District. He's the youngest child of former Senator Ted Kennedy and a nephew of JFK and RFK, so he's certainly an expert on the political landscape. He's also a passionate advocate for mental health and is the author of the new book, Profiles in Mental Health Courage. It promises to be a fascinating interview. Before we start the show, just a quick ask. If you enjoy Common Denominator, we'd be grateful if you like, comment, and subscribe wherever you watch or listen to this podcast. It helps promote the show, and it helps us get great guests. Thanks so much, and now here's my conversation with Patrick. Hi, Patrick, and welcome to Common Denominator.
Great to be with you, Moshe.
So, Patrick, you and I share a tremendous passion for mental health, and we're going to get into that more a little later in the interview. But I know we're only a few weeks away from the election, and it's probably, maybe just because I'm a little older, seen a little more, it's a wild, wild time. So what is it like? Maybe you have kind of anecdotally or firsthand experiences. What is it like for the candidates at this point with all the insanity, all the money, all the super PACs and outside influences and noise and polls? What's actually going on, like behind the curtain nowadays?
Well, I think it's changed dramatically since when I left elective office in 2011. I can honestly tell you, I was so blessed to have had a chance to serve in Congress for 16 years, and before that in the state legislature, which was just a tremendous experience, a very small little district. I basically knew everybody in my district. The intimacy was terrific. In Rhode Island, even when I was a member of Congress, the way you knew your constituents and they knew you. And it was just so great. Like I had to go up and campaign for this fellow who was running for the seat that I used to hold. And we went all around the district that I used to represent, and it was nothing like it was when I went. It's not the district changed, the politics has changed, where all we needed to do is the social media hits in this part of the district, in that part of the district, and there weren't crowds. Like back when I was you'd go to the Portuguese social club in Pawtucket. You'd go to the parade down in East Providence. You would go up to the Museum on Labor in Woonsocket and then visit the Cumberland Senior Center on your way back. Like you were around people. It was all a retail business. And now it's all social media. Like there's no crowds. Yes, they'll have these kind of, mock crowds, like where they set up a bunch of supporters that are already in your camp, and then you all kind of speak to them, and it's really speaking to the camera. It's not speaking to the people in the audience. Like, I was fortunate; I had to speak
Yeah.
to everybody in the audience, and believe me, they didn't come in with a fixed idea as to which way they thought on a particular issue. By and large, that's all changed. Now everybody's got a fixed idea as to what their view of the world is, and there's very little that you can do to change it. And that, I think, is what's so hard to see in our country today, that it's up to just a small percentage of the population already knows how they're going to go, and that it's really that small sliver that, both of these candidates are trying to speak to.
What is, just so people know, right? Because you would think if you don't understand this, that it would just be like a popular vote. What is the general system for electing a president in America, as far as the Electoral College?
Yeah. So obviously all this stuff was set up by the framers, and the idea behind all of it, there was a rhyme and reason to it. They had to balance the politics back in the day between the most populous states, and they also had to balance the states themselves. So essentially it was, do we have just a few states drive the whole national agenda because they got all the people in it, or are we going to have some effort to bring the whole country together by also giving power to the states? That's why we started the Senate. That's the reason the framers put the Senate together. The House was representing the people, the Senate represented the states. And so the Electoral College itself is part and parcel. Like, we have to have checks and balances. And the thought behind the Electoral College is that we need to have a little bit more buffer between the pure passions of the people and the ultimate decision as to who gets the nod. And it's a convoluted process, and I certainly think this day and age, its usefulness to us have gone way past the time that we're living in. We need to have direct popular vote. We would have several of the last elected presidents would not have been president if we had had direct. Hillary Clinton won.
Sure.
Al Gore won. And I could just go back. John Kerry, who knows? My point is that there are several, everyone thinks that these are so close. There are several recent elections where we would have had a totally different outcome if the popular vote had been the vote that had counted. So we're still stuck in this, where it's the Electoral College, and that's why there's the focus on these handful of states that are the, quote, swing states that could determine who gets numerically to over 270 on the Electoral College count.
And if you were advising any of the candidates, now there's only a few weeks left, because I remember, right, with Comey, you mentioned Clinton, Hillary Clinton, right? That came out. That was like, I guess that was October. That was like maybe September, October time, right before the election. But is there anything externally, and maybe that will come out, or something that the candidates can do? Because it's so narrow, right? There's about 7 swing states, and within them, they're so close, right? Is there something that the candidates can do today, if you were advising, that could possibly shift their vote at this point?
Well, to the point on the common denominator, my wife ran for Congress 4 years ago, came up short. I live in a very polarized, very red district that she ran in. Nonetheless, she was motivated to run. We gave it our best go of it. So I gave a talk at my Catholic church a couple of years ago about my first book, A Common Struggle, about my own struggles with addiction. And a couple of years after that, the woman who runs the choir, who she and her husband play at the Lambs of God, kind of, which is the protest group outside of abortion clinics. Safe to say she has nothing in common with me, right? I was denied communion in Rhode Island when I was a congressman there for being pro-choice and being pro-gay marriage. But her son was in a crisis. And because she had known me, because no one talks about these issues, but because I had, and that I was the only person that came to mind when her son was suffering, she approached me and said, "Is there anything you could do? We're really worried we're going to lose him if we don't get him help right now. We feel like he's right now ready to take help." And so, I have to do this as part of my obligation because for my own sobriety, helping others is the way I get relieved from my own self-imposed prison of self-pity and self-centeredness. So I go, I know the hospital CEO, get him right in. I know the rehab, the Brian O'Neill, like, Brian, can you scholarship this guy? No problem. So 3 years pass, and I am now baptizing my baby, my fifth child, who's now 6. So it's a couple of years ago, for baptizing him. And at the altar, I'm standing there, and I see her, the woman and she and her husband are standing behind their son, who I remember, that's the guy that I helped. And he's standing there holding his baby. And she turns to me and she says, "He's got 3 years of sobriety. We would not be here today of continued sobriety with our grandchild, with our son sober. Patrick, Kennedy, whatever we can do for you, count us in." Now, she would never be caught dead given her political affiliation, saying that to, a Democrat, let alone Democrat with the last name Kennedy. Like, never in a million years. But to the point of the common denominator, we're both human beings. We both know what it is to have these illnesses affect us personally. And I am like this with her. I hug her every Sunday when I'm at things. She includes my oldest daughter, plays the piano for her and her little band up in the balcony for the church. I mean, and I've just been asked to go speak to Priest Day by Cardinal Supich, who's in Chicago and has become a friend, who's also got family experiences with addiction and mental illness. I had lunch, about a year ago with Cardinal Tobin, who's our cardinal here in New Jersey, and he's openly in recovery. I can say that because it's all public, and they're both setting up meetings for me next month in Rome with the Vatican to try to get the Vatican to do a conference on addiction. So, Moshe, like literally 13 years ago when I left Congress, I was a nobody. Right? I had no public office, no staff, no nothing. I left Rhode Island and Washington, D.C., cleared out my address book. I mean, I was like, I had hit the ground bottom, so to speak, and building my life back. I could never have imagined 13 years later being able to be of use to others. I could never have imagined just a few years ago having Speaker Pelosi ask me to come and help do an intervention on one of my former colleagues, all because I wasn't going to tell them what to do. I was just going to tell them, hey, listen, I used to be where you are, and this was what happened to me, and this is how it works. If you get on the other side of this, your life can be great. That's what she wanted me to do.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting. What really sticks out to me, and I think that we have to talk about it more. But for you in your journey in life, why is it so important that mental health and addiction struggles, people should talk about it more? Why do you think practically that's important?
Well, I think this experience that I've had where the iceberg melts and the connection is so powerful when people meet each other and have, common struggle, which is the name of my first book. I was on Trump's opioid crisis commission. I tried my best. He lost his son, his brother to addiction, to alcoholism. I've been with President Biden for years. I used to be close to my dad when they were both in the Senate. I knew, the family's very well known for having suffered from this disease of addiction. I have, but neither the president nor the former president really wants to go down and talk, right?
Mm.
Really, I mean, I tell you, President Biden has done more than any other president for mental health and addiction. I mean, he's put so much money. He started the certified community behavioral health centers. He put this rule out a month ago enforcing the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, which I authored. Took us literally 15 years to get a rule to enforce it, but he did it. But I will tell you, even with all of that, he's still of my dad's generation and uncomfortable talking about this, right?
Right.
And if I let's just say if it was Joe Biden was still in this race, okay, I would tell him, go around the country and meet with family members, parents of kids suffering from addiction, and hear them out. And at the end of each meeting, say, I know what it's like. I've been there too, as you all know. And as president and as your next president, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to make sure we reduce the amount of suffering in this country. I've told everyone in his staff, I've told everyone everywhere, that's would have been a winning campaign for Joe Biden. Now, I think the same could be true for Kamala and Tim. We all saw during the convention, Tim Waltz, who I've known for a long time, was a colleague of mine in Congress, terrific human being. And as we saw in the convention, has a personal interest in this. If everyone saw that convention and saw his relationship with his son, Gus. But it's the personal connection that matters to people. It's not when we're talking from our head, it's whether we're talking from our heart. And people are suffering the world round. And if we could cut through the academic and intellectual and actually talk the language of the heart, that's what would win an election, honestly. If I were advising either one of the campaigns.
By the way, it really speaks, amongst many CEOs and just from the business perspective, I think you talk about the word vulnerability. You have to lead with vulnerability because that's truth. People see through the noise of posturing and diplomacy and politics. If you could talk, right, where do you connect? Where's the greatest connections? Like you look at veterans, right? They've been to war together, right? When someone else has to have your back, life or death, or things like that, right? When you're struggling and you find somebody, right, dealing with bouts of addiction, and it's a family member, right? Those are real conversations. No money, no power, no games, nothing, right? These are real situations. And if you have those discussions, because I'm fortunate in certain ways, but that people talk to me, and I tell you, I live in Miami, just in my community, it could be food addictions, alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex. I mean, you can name them. And people literally a couple times a week, where it's not necessarily open, but they'll open up to me. And, they don't know how or what to do as far as a process, right? So I'm definitely a big proponent of that vulnerability and speaking, and kind of speaking the truth. But maybe we can go back just a little bit. I just want to hear your journey, just for the listeners. What was your journey? I guess, was this something in teenage years? What was your addiction?
I came from an alcoholic family. My mom suffered tremendously from alcoholism. My father as well. Different types of alcoholism, just like there's different types of anxieties, different types of addictions and depressions. People all think there's a monolithic, diagnosis of addiction or anxiety or depression. It's really a spectrum, like we hear autism spectrum. There's not a one particular type of diagnosis. It's very stratified. So my mom, fall down, my dad, super successful, powered through, the most, successful and accomplished U.S. senator in modern history, if not all throughout the history of the Senate, authored and saw signed into law more pieces of legislation than any other senator in history. And he struggled his whole life. And he had post-traumatic stress. He saw his two brothers murdered. He saw countless other tragedies. He suffered the trauma of losing his brothers. And then he had a tragedy losing the passenger in his car when he drove off a bridge in Chappaquiddick. I mean, the power of trauma on both my parents' lives was immense. My grandmother died at 61, wasn't found for over a week. Because she was an alcoholic, and I never saw my mother never heard her mention her name or even talk about her at all until the day she died. I didn't even know my mom had a mom until the day her mother died. And her mother died alone. And my mom, by the way, never talked to me about her mother's death even since then. Never once. Only time I saw my mom cry was the day my mom lost her mom, who, as I said, was alcoholic and was isolated. All I can say is we all have these stories. I'm not alone. Everybody's got family histories. I have a genetic predisposition on both sides of my family. And if you study the research on addiction and mental illness, it's like cancer, it's like cardiovascular disease. You have a genetic predisposition for these illnesses, just as you do these other illnesses. In fact, more so with addiction and mental illness. So I had the genetic vulnerability, and then of course I lived in a life where both my parents suffered from such great trauma and alcoholism in the home. And so when I look back, it was no surprise that I became a full-fledged alcoholic addict. So so I was in treatment at 17 for cocaine. Thought I had fixed that. Drank. Ended up having problems with alcohol, went into treatment again for that, got sober. Then I had surgery, got addicted to Oxycontin. I needed to have stimulants to help me because of the impact of my addiction. This was before prescription drug monitoring. So I was in the Congress at the time. I had people writing me scripts for oxys everywhere. And I had to counteract that. So I started getting prescriptions for Adderall. And so here I am. I got benzodiazepines, uppers, downers. All the while I was thinking I'm fine because they're prescribed, right? Because I'm not putting a needle in my arm. I must not have a drug problem. So a bottom line is now I'm in recovery 13 years. My February 22nd, 2011 is a permanent sobriety date. I've not had to use drugs or alcohol or any mood or mind-altering substance since then. I am actively engaged in my own recovery. But why I'm saying all that is that I still have to deal with other addictions. So, there are process addictions. And as a student of this movement, gambling, pornography, food, internet, sports betting is the new thing that's just raging. And I think is going to create just a monumental problem for our country going forward, especially since you can't turn on any, sporting event without seeing all of these sports betting apps being advertised to you. But my point is that, we need to understand these issues, and we need a system so that people can get help and treatment, so they don't have to be capsized and held hostage by these issues, which doesn't have to be the case if we had a better system to take care of people.
Why do I feel Fortune 500 companies and deep-pocketed actors that don't necessarily have a moral compass? Because we were doing a show before, and certain, let's say, social media or video games, they have these behavioral health experts, or they have the experts, right? That's what they're doing. The marketing, how to get more eyeballs, how to get, whether it's alcohol, how to brand, and it's a really, really, really tough battle, right? Parents should realize this, and family members should realize this one way or another. Like you're saying, sports betting, they make it seem, right? And you said even pharmaceuticals, Oxycontin, all this, right? The people are running in the fields, and they're whispering the side effects of whatever it happens to be, right? Like why, if we take a step back, realize the truth, we're being subtly bombarded one way or another in our predisposition. Like you're saying, if it's genetic, right? The addiction is genetic. Who's super strong like that to fight off every single demon, every single battle? It seems
You got
wild.
commercialized marijuana now everywhere.
Right.
I took my 5 kids down to my local town hall to try to stop the zoning of a pot shop in my area. Now, I can acknowledge there's marijuana is always everywhere, but not to the degree it is today, and not with the marketing that we're up against today. I mean, when I was growing up, my father took on big tobacco, he and Henry Waxman and a bunch of others. And we finally got all the tobacco CEOs admit that nicotine was addictive, that they knew their product was addictive. Took us forever to do that. Then we had a big settlement. Then, how many years later, we're having a new big tobacco? We have all of these people say, oh, it's just about trying to make sure we rectify the social injustice of too many people of color in our prisons. Meanwhile, pot shops are 15 times more likely to be in black neighborhoods than white neighborhoods. 15 times more likely. Black neighborhoods have to have all those all surrounding them and their kids, right? And by the way, the idea that we're somehow going to treat our way out of this addiction and crisis that we have while we're pouring gasoline on the fire, and we've got sports betting, we've got social media, we got marijuana, we've got now alcohol that's got these, vodka spritzers, and you've got hard lemonade and iced tea. I mean, I don't know. I didn't remember this being so easy. Now, if you're a kid today, Moshe, and you got a lot of them, okay? If you're a kid today and you have anxiety, which, by the way, majority of young people today are suffering, generally, and you can easily put your hands on something that makes you feel better, what are you going to do? I don't care if you have a predisposition to addiction or not. You are vulnerable to becoming addicted, especially if you start using early. That's the other piece, before your brain is fully developed by 27. And this is where these kids are suffering. And what are we doing as adults? We're looking the other way and saying, oh, isn't it awful, this mental health crisis? Oh my God, I wish we could do something. First thing we should do is do no harm, like they say in the practice of medicine. Do not bombard our kids with all of this advertising that tells them it's okay for them to drink and drug and not feel like there's any problem with it.
By the way, just look at the college campuses, right? It's cool. It's normal. The frat parties and binge drinking, that's just right as they're developing, 18 to 22, right? And they're sitting there, and that is across the boards at football games. I mean, you talk about it, right? But you step on toes because alcohol became something that's just popular. It's just typical, right? It's like, oh, no big deal. And by the way, you mentioned about legalization of marijuana. In a few weeks, we have
Prop 3 in Florida.
In Florida, that's right.
Yeah, watch. I'm going to be on one of those ads.
Right. So
yeah,
right. So, but the only thing, so I don't know what your position is, but I think
my position is I'm against commercialization. I think I'm for decriminalization. We shouldn't put anybody in prison, but at the same time, we should not be incentivizing companies to advertise this stuff everywhere because they make profit off how many people they get to use their product. There is a big difference between decriminalization and commercialization. Unfortunately, the marijuana people have conflated the two issues and making it think that you got to be for commercialization if you don't like black people being, or any other community of color being in the jails overrepresented. But that's what it's about. We can decriminalize without having to commercialize this stuff.
Yeah, and people don't realize it becomes constitutional, so it's in the Florida Constitution, so it's above a regular law. Number two, there's no liability for the distributors, and it'll be in schools. It'll be everywhere. I mean, that is what ends up happening. It's no big deal till it's a big deal, right? So there has to be some moderation of that. We can have that discussion, but the lobby from my research that I saw, I mean, this is just the way it is everywhere, but I think the company called TrueLeaf, I think that's what they are, but they have 40% of the market share, and they've spent in their corporate disclosures, they've spent upwards of $50 million lobbying and putting out stuff throughout Florida. So I don't know. I have 11 kids. Do I really want recreational marijuana with no controls all over the place? I don't know. It's probably there probably should be like someone said on the show a couple weeks ago. We were talking about it, and that it should be regulated like alcohol, something different ideas.
Listen, do you want your 11 kids growing up driving down Route 95,
right,
with all those people who are going to be stoned on the highway?
Yeah.
I mean, there's another aspect to this. I don't want my kids to have any other risk factor for getting addicted. They've got a lot already. But I also don't want my kids having any more, safety issues because everyone else out there is stoned. Anyway, I sound like an old idiot because, I was 30 years ago drinking and drugging and smoking myself. And here I am. But bottom line is today it is marketably much worse in terms of the availability and potency of the drugs, right? That's why we have the overdose crisis because, I used to be on Oxycontin, so this stuff, the fentanyl and marijuana, I used to smoke as 2% marijuana. Today it's upwards of 90%. You can vape it, you can eat it, these edibles, and you can drink it. It's like Fanta grape aid with THC in the grape aid. Now, as an addict, I'd love that stuff. I could get my Red Bull, my vodka, my, elixir with marijuana. I mean, this thing is made for America because we love our addictions, don't we? In our country,
yes, we
just love our addictions.
I know you mentioned before the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. So you said that was going on for many years. It seems like, I guess, the insurance companies cover, in other words, tell us a little bit about that act. Yeah.
So the law says that insurance, I blew out my lifetime cap for mental health when I was 22, right? So there used to be lifetime caps to your total amount of spending for mental health and addiction. We got rid of that. There used to be higher co-pays if you were to pay for a mental health and addiction service than you would for diabetes, asthma, cardiovascular disease, cancer. We got rid of the higher copays. Then there used to be higher premiums if you had a mental illness. We got rid of that. So premiums, copays, deductibles used to be so much higher. We got rid of. So we basically said you can't charge higher copays, deductibles, premiums, or have lower lifetime caps for mental health and addiction compared to other medical illnesses. We got that. Now, what was the problem? Insurance companies now found other ways to deny care, which was through quote unquote medical management, i.e., do you qualify for pre-authorization to get into this treatment center? Well, how bad do you have to be? Well, you have to come in on a gurney, reeking of alcohol and blow a 2.0. Like, is that what it takes? Or can you just be someone with a disease of addiction and need help and get the help? So when there's all kinds of pre-auth, then there's concurrent review. And that's when you go to rehab, but then you're kicked out after 4 days because they say, oh, you're all better. Boom, you're out, which we know is not good for someone with this illness. And then there's retroactive review. That's when insurance companies would say, oh, yeah, you went to rehab for a month. Isn't that great? We just found out that it wasn't medically necessary. You're going to eat the bill. And you've got all of that, plus the insurance industry doesn't pay the providers what they would pay providers for, musculoskeletal, asthma, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. Those are, if you look at those occupations in healthcare and compare them to the clinical applications and occupations of those who treat mental health and addiction, there's no comparison. People who work in the mental health addiction field get paid peanuts. And now we wonder during this crisis, why aren't there enough people so that I have to wait 6 months before I can even see a psychiatrist
Yeah.
or see a psychologist. And by the way, why is everyone just taking cash? Which means, why can't I find someone in my network who will cover my illness? Because they're all outside the network taking cash. But guess why? Because the insurance industry is not paying the market rate in the insurance so that people can get covered. Because by the way, they're paying for health insurance, but they're having to pay twice, because if they need mental health, they have to pay more. And we would never accept that if that were some other area of medicine. So the new rule that we just got passed, which I'm proud to say the Kennedy Forum was instrumental in helping to draft and push through with the Biden administration, basically goes after these more insidious aspects that impact the availability and accessibility of care for people in this country to get access to care.
That's really amazing. I want to say congratulations on your new book, Profiles in Mental Health Courage. Right. I know that your uncle wrote Profiles in Courage. Right. So I like that play. But what should we expect from that book? What's the key takeaway from your new book?
Well, the key takeaway is that it's not a story of individuals and their struggle. It's a story of families and their struggle. And 9 times out of 10, anyone in your audience reads a story about someone coming out of addiction or struggling, it's their narrative. In other words, you never hear the parents' views, the siblings' views, the children's view, the coworkers' view. In this book, I interview the one person, and there are different diagnoses, and there's different people from different walks of life. But I also interview their therapists, their family members, their coworkers, because that's the real way to get a really realistic portrayal. Because most people out there don't have a real sense of what this is like living day to day with these illnesses. When they read Profiles in Mental Health Courage, they will know the texture, the absolute day-to-day struggles that go hand in hand with trying to get care, trying to navigate employment, trying to navigate housing, trying to navigate all the different vagaries of insurance and treatment, and frankly, personal relationships, because that impacts so much your chance of recovery, is if the people around you understand what you're going through and can support your recovery. So that's what, and my last thing about it is, at the end of the book, we have a QR code in the book, and that's to our Alignment for Progress. So none of these stories have an advocacy bent to them. None of these people are talking because they got to pitch some project or some, therapy or whatever. In the back of the book, I have a QR code to our Alignment for Progress. It's also on our Kennedy Forum website. And that is the first ever policy guide for members of Congress, easily could be adapted to state legislatures. It's basically an overview of all the issues that we need to deal with if we want to address this crisis comprehensively. So the point of the book is to help people not feel so alone, because they'll read their own stories in this, and they won't feel like I'm the jerk because everyone else seems to be able to get it together, but I can't. I'm a loser. Well, guess what? When they read this book, they'll realize, hey, these are messy issues. They're complicated. Nothing is black and white. And don't be so hard on yourself. These are struggles. And there's some struggles that people can move forward from. Others people get stuck in. And I don't have a happy ever after in all of these chapters. They're realistic, is what I'm saying, which means that they're not all happy ever afters, but that's what we need out there, so people don't feel like they're the only ones that can't make it, because all of social media and all the news coverage only reports either the dismal failures or the big successes, and leaves out everything in between.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, getting a clear the truth, right? There's this side, that side, and there's the truth. But Patrick, what's something that you're grateful for?
I'm grateful for my family. Obviously, I've got 5 kids, all healthy. I have a wife who's I've been faithful to, and doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're in recovery from addiction. You can be sober not only from using drugs and alcohol, but from being acting out on lust and other areas of addiction. I'll tell you, I am blessed because I have a spouse who totally supports me, who I have a level of intimacy with that's profound. We love our children. We're so they just give us so much joy. I'm so grateful for my recovery group. I rely on them, and I day to day I check in with my fellows in recovery. And I would say to your audience who's listening, it's possible to say that you're a person in long-term recovery and not violate the 11th tradition of one of these 12-step, any of the 12-step groups. So 11th tradition says you should be anonymous with respect to that particular 12-step group. It doesn't mean you're supposed to be silent when it comes to your own recovery and, importantly, your advocacy. Because if we don't change the dollars that as taxpayers we give government so that the government can give it to us, i.e. our society, to make society better, and if all they're doing is spending those dollars on other priorities when we've got such a record rate of suicide and overdose, that's on us as citizens to change. And the only way it's going to change is if we say, yes, I'm a person in recovery. I come from a family of addiction. I don't want to see this stuff that puts people at risk manifest in our public policies. I want to get treatment that's treatment on demand, that is evidence-based interventions. But I have to vote for that. I have to advocate for that. That's what we need today. We don't have any advocacy, Moshe. No advocacy. I love NAMI, MHA, all the groups. But when you consider where our advocacy is today against the demand and need out there, given the epidemic of suicide and overdose, we're nowhere near where we need to be to change the course of this country's trajectory in terms of the escalating suicide rates and continued addiction rates in this country.
By the way, I have this theory that the general framework of society, everybody has to act all, we talked about like vulnerability, but act all tough, but also they've gotten burned time and time again by people that they've opened up to, right? Trust. And I think that if we can, I don't have all the solutions, but I think the issue, right? Half of the solution is figuring out the issue. People to trust more people. I read an article that maybe a generation ago, people would trust one or two people with their secrets. Nowadays, it's like zero, right? So if you can't trust, then who do you talk to? So
Actually, I've been a Roman Catholic my whole life, but I've really been rarely practicing Catholic. When I got in recovery, and part of my recovery requires a full inventory, me telling on myself to another, I wasn't comfortable doing it until I got to do it and found out that I was okay. Now I do confession at church, and I find it enormously helpful in lifting the burden for me. And I feel my life is much more spiritually connected as a result of it. Speaking about trust, I never chose to be public with my addictions. I had the guy that I was in drug rehab with sell his story to the National Enquirer, which put me on the cover of the National Enquirer because the roommate I had in drug rehab, had his picture in there and says I was with, Patrick Kennedy and he's a drug addict. So, but looking back on it, Moshe, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. At the moment, obviously I wanted to kill the guy and I thought my political career was over.
Yeah.
But since then, I think it was really one of the best things that ever happened to me, just as it was for me to have to leave Congress because of my addiction. Thought it was the end of my life.
By the way, what would you
13 years later, I'm married. I've got 5 kids. I have a different life. You can't look at any given moment and make that judgment without the situational awareness that only comes from being able to look back on it years later to know that, things are going to be okay.
Yeah. It's very hard when you're right in the moment to see that. But what would you say if you'd have to sum up the common denominator of someone with addiction that's in sobriety, that's actually thriving? What would you say is the common
other-centered? They're other-centered. They're not all about themselves. The most successful people I see in recovery are always throughout the day living the prayer. Like everything they do is about helping someone else. And it's so ironic and a countercultural or paradoxical, if you would, to say that you get more in life by giving away. Like that we're all trying to fill ourselves up, as we say in recovery, fill the hole in the soul, like with, all kinds of things. But when do we feel the best? We feel the best when we've done something totally selfless for one of our family members or a good friend, something that just gives us esteem because, makes us feel good about ourselves. That can happen. That feeling can happen all the time if you make sure that you're intentional about trying to do something for others, which for people who are self-centered like me, I've got to be very intentional and make plans to be helpful to others because it doesn't come natural. But my life today is the best it's ever been because I work on trying to break that self-centeredness and focus on what I can do for others.
And I'll tell you that what's interesting, if people will just think just logically, when do I feel the best? I feel the best when I give other people. Forget about everything. It's actually, reverse it. It's actually the most selfish thing, right?
Yes.
So I feel great by giving, selfless,
Yes.
right? By not expecting anything. So why wouldn't I want to feel good?
Right.
Right. So more people should give of their time, of their energy, of their resources, because that's actually the win. That's actually the win on the highest level. That's freedom, actually.
I'm a drug addict. Okay. I want to feel better. This is the thing.
But that's the natural dopamine. And going to do some exercise. But I want to, Patrick, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate it. How can people learn more about you, get your book, follow you on social?
Well, it's the KennedyForum.org. Hard to forget that. The KennedyForum.org. We're just about policy, and the book is just a way for me to get people to put eyeballs behind policy, which seems boring and esoteric. But if we don't change the way we pay for this stuff, we're never going to change what we get. We have to change the whole way of financing this stuff. So we're not paying for critical care, episodic, reactive care. We're paying for chronic care and prevention. Most importantly, we really invest in prevention, and it's possible to do. It is possible, but we have to be organized and really we have to build a political movement on a bipartisan basis so that if you're voting in a Republican primary or a Democratic primary, you know which candidates are the ones that are doing the right thing. I mean, the really right thing, not just saying they're doing the right thing. So we need to develop a whole process politically to get more mature and sophisticated in our advocacy.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. It's really, really appreciated.
Likewise.
And I know that this episode will strengthen a lot of people. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Patrick. Next week, we chat with Richard Green. Richard is an expert in U.S. civics and a legendary political communications advisor. In fact, he served in that capacity for multiple presidents, prime ministers, and even Princess Diana. He'll give us an expert course in civics and explore how safe your vote truly is. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, we'd be grateful for a like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, feel free to leave a rating and review. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you again soon.